Have you ever poured your heart into something, only for it to, well, fall completely flat?
Oh, yeah.
That sting of a setback, right? That feeling of not quite measuring up, or just the sheer challenge of pushing past what feels like a failure. I think we've all been there.
Definitely. Those moments when things just don't go as planned, they can feel incredibly tough.
So today we're embarking on a deep dive into something really powerful. It's this intricate dance between failure, success, and maybe the inner qualities that actually define our journey.
It's a great topic. Like, can failure really be the new success? Is that just a saying or?
Exactly. And how do we cultivate the mindset to, actually transform setbacks into triumphs?
Yeah, how do we do that?
To help us explore this, we'll be drawing on some really foundational concepts. We've got Albert Bandura's work on self-efficacy,
Classic.
Carol Dweck's groundbreaking insights into fixed and growth mindsets,
Crucial stuff.
and some perspectives from Psychology Today on how to genuinely learn from failure and maybe redefine success. We'll also unpack the concept of grit and the pivotal role of discipline.
Sounds like a packed agenda. Let's dive in.
Okay, so we often hear that saying, failure is a great teacher. It's almost a cliche, isn't it?
It really is.
But if that's true, why is it so incredibly challenging for us to actually learn those lessons? What makes us resist it so much?
Well, it's interesting because our sources point to some pretty significant emotional and cognitive barriers.
Okay.
Emotionally, failure just injures our ego, right? It
Right.
threatens our sense of self-worth.
Right.
We're basically wired to want to feel good about ourselves, and acknowledging failure can seriously clash with that core goal. So often we just dismiss or ignore failures. It's kind of like self-preservation.
That makes perfect sense, like a built-in defense mechanism kicks in, trying to protect how we see ourselves.
Exactly.
But what about the cognitive side? Is our brain also, working against us here?
Absolutely. Our minds tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe, that thing called confirmation bias.
All right.
And since we generally expect to succeed, why else try something new, right? Failure kind of violates this belief we hold dear.
So we overlook it.
We overlook it, or we rationalize it away, which, begs the question. If failure is so unexpected, it should be super informative, shouldn't it?
It absolutely should. It's novel information. So if our brains are supposedly wired to learn from novelty, what's getting in the way? Is it just harder work for the brain?
Precisely. The sources actually highlight that learning from failure is more cognitively demanding. It takes more mental energy than learning from success,
How so?
because it requires us to figure out the right answer for the wrong one. You have to deduce what went wrong and what should have happened.
Okay.
And, as the sources note, we humans are often cognitive misers. Our brains are wired to be efficient, maybe too efficient sometimes. They prefer to save mental energy.
Like taking the easy route.
Exactly. So wrestling with why something went wrong, figuring out the correct path from the incorrect one, that's actually a heavier mental lift.
So it's not just emotionally tough, it's literally more work for our brains.
That's the insight, yeah. It's mentally exhausting to learn from failure, which is partly why we tend to avoid digging into it.
Okay, that's a really powerful point. If it's so mentally taxing, how can we overcome this natural resistance? How do we unlock the valuable information that failure holds?
Well, our sources suggest some concrete strategies. For one, learning from other people's failures can be really effective.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
It takes the personal emotional sting out of it, Like watching one of those epic fail videos online. Maybe we laugh, but there's some subtle learning happening there too.
Yeah, your brain is kind of logging, don't do that,
Yeah.
without the personal embarrassment.
Exactly. Another approach is using distanced self-talk, sort of talking to yourself about the setback like you would talk to a friend.
Like giving yourself advice from the outside.
Kind of, yeah. It creates a bit of emotional distance. Also, just improving our overall competence in an area can help shore up our ego, making us less threatened by any single failure.
So feeling generally capable makes specific failures less devastating.
Right. And finally, maybe the most powerful shift is reframing the goal, moving from just succeeding to learning.
So a failed experiment is actually a success if the goal was to gain knowledge.
Precisely. The outcome isn't failure, it's data.
Okay, so if our brains are naturally a bit resistant to learning from failure, how do some people still manage to push through and actually grow from it?
Well, our sources suggest the answer might lie in something really foundational, how we view our own abilities.
Which brings us perfectly to Carol Dweck's work on mindsets. fixed versus growth? What's the fundamental difference there?
So the fixed mindset, that's rooted in the belief that your core qualities, think intelligence, personality, character, are basically set in stone, unchangeable,
Fixed, like cement.
pretty much. And this leads to this primary desire to constantly prove you have those qualities, and crucially, to avoid looking deficient.
So if that's the core belief, what does that actually look like in practice? Does every single situation become some kind of test?
Exactly. Every situation becomes a test. Will I succeed or fail? Will I look smart or dumb? Accepted or rejected? It's all about confirmation, proving what you think you already are.
Wow, that sounds stressful.
It can be. Now, in stark contrast, you have the growth mindset. This is based on the belief that your basic qualities can be cultivated, developed through effort, through learning.
So not set in stone, more like a muscle you can build.
Exactly like that. And this belief, it ignites this powerful passion for learning. As Dweck famously put it, why waste time proving over and over how great you are when you could be getting better?
That's such a light bulb moment, isn't it? It just highlights that massive difference between trying to hide your weaknesses versus actively trying to overcome them.
Right. Or choosing experiences that will stretch you instead of just sticking to what you know you can do well.
That passion for stretching yourself and, crucially, persisting, especially when things get tough, that's really the hallmark of the growth mindset.
And a fascinating concept Dweck talks about is not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, imagine a school giving a grade of not yet instead of fail.
Oh, wow.
It immediately signals you're on a learning curve, right?
Right.
Gives you a clear path into the future rather than just hitting a dead end.
That's incredibly insightful. It changes the whole meaning of not succeeding right away.
Yeah.
And the sources mention studies showing brain activity differences, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Students with a fixed mindset show very little brain activity when they encounter an error. It's like their brain just shuts down.
Doesn't want to engage with the failure.
Exactly. But those with a growth mindset, their brains are apparently on fire with yet. They're engaging deeply, processing the error, learning from it, correcting it. You can almost picture the neurons firing, like you said.
So the big question then becomes, how do we cultivate this growth mindset in ourselves or maybe in our kids, our students, our teams?
Dweck suggests focusing praise on the process. So praising effort, strategies, focus, perseverance, improvement.
Rather than just, you're so smart or you're so talented.
Precisely. Praising innate intelligence can actually foster a fixed mindset. And furthermore, teaching people, especially students, about brain plasticity, how their neurons literally form new, stronger connections when they push out of their comfort zone.
Showing them their brain can grow.
Yes, that's been shown to lead to significant improvements in grades. It empowers them.
Okay, building on this whole idea of inner drive and the power of belief, let's bring in Albert Bandinger's concept of self-efficacy.
Another giant.
Yeah. Our sources define it as the belief in one's capability to organize and execute courses of action required to attain designated types of performances. Bit of a mouthful, but how does this idea really connect to overcoming setbacks?
Well, this belief in your capabilities, your self-efficacy, it's really a core element. It determines whether you'll even start a challenging task.
Right, whether you even try.
Exactly. And then how much effort you put in and how long you'll keep going, especially when you hit difficulties or, threatening experiences, is basically the engine driving perseverance.
So it's not just about what we expect will happen if we succeed, like the outcome.
No.
But whether we truly believe we can do the actions needed to get there.
That's the key distinction. The sources clearly differentiate between efficacy expectations, believing you can do the behavior, and outcome expectations, what you think will happen if you do it.
And where does this belief, this self-efficacy actually come from?
It's fascinating. Bandura identified 4 main sources. First, and most powerful, is performance accomplishments.
Our own past successes.
Exactly. Your own direct experiences of mastering something. Successes build efficacy, repeated failures lower it. This one's the heavyweight.
Makes sense. What's next?
Second is vicarious experience, watching others succeed.
Seeing someone else do it.
Especially someone you see as similar to yourself. If they can do it, you think, hey, maybe I can too. It boosts your own belief.
Okay, so personal wins and seeing others win. Number 3.
Third is verbal persuasion. Basically, being convinced by others that you have what it takes.
Like a pep talk.
Yeah, like a pep talk. It's less powerful on its own, but it can definitely help sustain effort, especially if the underlying belief is somewhat realistic. You can't just talk someone into believing they can fly, right?
Right. Got it. And the 4th one?
Fourth is physiological states or emotional arousal. how your body reacts in a situation.
Like feeling butterflies in your stomach.
Exactly. High anxiety, fear, that feeling of dread, those physical sensations can lower your perceived self-efficacy. Conversely, learning to manage that arousal, maybe through relaxation techniques, can increase it.
Wow, that framework really clarifies things. It helps understand the mechanics behind changing behavior.
Right.
It suggests that, therapy or coaching often works by targeting these very sources.
Absolutely. It gives you levers to pull.
So thinking about this, when you personally feel a lack of confidence in something new, which source do you find most powerful for yourself? Is it watching someone else, getting that pep talk, or digging up a past success? It seems like knowing this gives you a roadmap to actually build that belief.
That's a great way to put it, a roadmap.
Okay, this leads us nicely into another really critical quality the sources talk about,
Yeah,
grit,
it's grit.
defined as perseverance and passion for long-term goals. How does grit fit into this bigger picture of success, failure, perseverance?
Well, grit, particularly studied by Angela Duckworth and her colleagues, really highlights this ability to maintain determination and motivation over long stretches of time. We're talking years, sometimes decades,
Even when things get tough.
especially when things get tough in the face of failure and adversity. And their research, interestingly, suggested that grit can sometimes be a better predictor of long-term success than pure intellectual talent, like IQ.
Better than IQ. In what kind of situations?
In various contexts, yeah. From things like educational attainment in adults to performance in really competitive environments, like the National Spelling Bee was one example they used.
That's a pretty bold claim, more predictive than IQ. Does that mean there's often, no connection between how smart someone is and how gritty they are? Or could it even be an inverse relationship sometimes? That feels really counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But yeah, the sources point out that grit is often independent of, or sometimes even slightly inversely correlated with, measured intelligence.
Wow.
So yes, it suggests that being incredibly smart doesn't automatically make you gritty. And sometimes the grittiest people aren't necessarily the ones with the highest IQ scores. It helps explain why some really brilliant people might not achieve those super long-term goals.
That is a surprising finding. So tell us more about what grit actually is. What are its components?
It's often conceptualized as having two main parts: perseverance of effort, just sticking with things, and consistency of interests, maintaining passion for those long-term goals.
Okay, perseverance and passion.
Right. Although it's worth noting there's some debate, some meta-analyses, like one by Marcus Creed, questioned if that passion or consistency of interest part really adds much predictive power beyond just the perseverance aspect alone.
So the question becomes, is grit just a fancy rebranding of conscientiousness, that big five personality trait?
That's exactly the debate. They are highly correlated, but some argue grit is different because it applies specifically to these extremely long-term, multi-year goals, whereas conscientiousness might be broader.
Okay. And the sources also make distinctions between grit and other similar ideas, right? Like resilience or ambition.
Yeah, they do. For example, grit is said to add that passion element to perseverance, and it's usually described as a stable trait, whereas resilience is often seen more as a dynamic process of bouncing back from adversity.
And ambition.
Unlike ambition, which might be about seeking fame or external validation, grit is framed more around achieving personal long-term goals that hold meaning for the individual.
Got it. But grit isn't without its critics, is it?
No, definitely not. There's been significant scientific discussion, even controversy. K. Anders Ericsson, the expert on expertise.
Oh yeah, the deliberate practice guy.
That's him. He criticized the tendency to just attribute persistent practice solely to a fixed trait like grit. He argued motivation is often more situation-specific.
What was his concern with the grit idea?
He felt it could lead to circular thinking. They practiced a lot because they have grit, and we know they have grit because they practiced a lot. He worried it could be damaging, potentially leading people to think, well, I guess I'm not gritty, so I might as well not even try.
That makes sense. And there have been criticisms in education too, right? About the grit narrative.
Yes, exactly. Concerns about potential victim blaming.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that focusing too much on grit might downplay very real systemic obstacles. Students face things like poverty, racism, lack of resources, or just ineffective teaching. It's a complex and nuanced area, for sure.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears slightly then to a quality that feels really fundamental, something that underpins a lot of what we've discussed. Discipline.
Ah, yes. Discipline.
Our sources emphasize that discipline isn't just about following rules, it's more about cultivating habits that guide us towards our goals and help unlock our potential.
It's fascinating how the sources frame it. Discipline helps create a structured routine, which is just essential for effective time management, isn't it?
Totally. It helps avoid that last-minute cramming, reduces stress.
And actually promotes better learning and retention over time.
Yeah.
It also fosters self-motivation.
How so?
Well, it empowers individuals to pursue success independently, rather than always relying on external pushes from, say, parents or teachers or bosses.
So discipline builds this deeper sense of responsibility where you really take ownership of your learning, your projects, your path.
Exactly. You become proactive. You understand that your success is directly tied to your own effort and consistency.
It makes me wonder, how does discipline help us stay focused in today's world? I mean, it's saturated with distractions, social media, notifications.
That's a huge challenge, right? And the sources suggest a disciplined mind is better equipped to tune out those distractions, to prioritize tasks effectively, dedicate full attention, which leads to deeper learning, better problem solving.
And it's not just about controlling external stuff, like putting your phone away.
No, not at all. The sources emphasize it also involves emotional and mental regulation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
A disciplined person learns to manage stress more effectively, to cope with failure more gracefully, maybe maintain a more positive attitude, even when things are tough.
So they can bounce back stronger from challenges and setbacks. That sounds like resilience again.
It's deeply connected. And ultimately, perhaps the most profound impact of discipline, according to these sources, is its role in preparing individuals for lifelong success.
Beyond just academics or the current project.
Right. It helps develop habits and attitudes, perseverance, focus, responsibility that serve you well in future careers, personal relationships, community involvement. It fosters, well-rounded individuals with a clearer sense of purpose.
Okay, so we've talked about mindset, self-efficacy, grit, discipline, all these internal qualities. But failure itself is still hard. Given how challenging it can be, how do we truly redefine success? Our sources offer this really powerful reframe, the idea that failure is the new success. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it's fascinating. Research indicates that happiness doesn't just come from external success. Winning the prize, getting the promotion.
That feeling doesn't always last.
Exactly. The emotional lift from those achievements is often surprisingly short-lived. And get this, some studies suggest people who have experienced failure sometimes report higher levels of long-term well-being than those who haven't faced significant setbacks.
Wait, really? Higher well-being after failing? That's incredibly counterintuitive.
It is, isn't it? It suggests that durable happiness might be fueled less by those external wins, the trophies, the titles, and more by internal sources.
Like what?
Things like having a sense of purpose, meaningful relationships, experiencing personal growth, things that failure can actually sometimes help cultivate.
Okay, so if that's the case, how do we consciously detach from this rigid win-or-lose thinking that's so common?
The suggestion is to reframe purpose. Think about little p purpose, as one source puts it.
Little p purpose.
Yeah, focusing on the process of doing something meaningful, something you value, regardless of whether it ends in a trophy or a rejection email.
So finding meaning in the doing itself, like the act of writing the book is fulfilling, even if it doesn't become a bestseller.
Precisely that. And this shift to a process-oriented approach seems to bring at least 3 really powerful benefits.
Okay, I'm listening. What are they?
First, courage. One study found that courage significantly boosts life satisfaction, even more than optimism or resilience, which is surprising.
Courage more than optimism. Wow.
Yeah. And when we decouple success from specific outcomes and instead attach it to the act of trying, the act of showing up, that gives us agency.
We might not control winning the race, but we always control whether we decide to run it.
Exactly. You control the effort, the engagement. That takes courage, and that's where the satisfaction can come from.
Okay, courage. What's the second benefit?
Second, resilience. Process-oriented individuals tend to burn out less
Why is that?
because their motivation is more intrinsic. It comes from within. They're fueled by doing what they genuinely find meaningful or engaging, not just by chasing rigid, often external goals. This builds stronger, more sustainable resilience.
Makes sense. You're not just running on willpower towards some distant finish line. And the third?
And third, flexibility. Clinging too tightly to rigid outcome-based goals makes us less adaptable when things inevitably change or go wrong.
Because if you define success only one way, failure feels final.
Right. But if success isn't so narrowly defined, if it's more about the process or the learning, then failure doesn't have to close doors. Instead, it can actually open new ones.
Like the example you mentioned earlier, the basketball player who missed the key shot.
Exactly. If his only definition of success was making that shot, it's crushing. But if his purpose was broader, being involved in the sport, contributing to a team, then that failure could lead him to coaching, mentoring, finding other ways to stay involved and find meaning. Failure becomes a pivot point, not an end point.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. Okay, so for anyone listening who might be feeling stuck, maybe carrying that negative loser label after a setback, our sources offer some really practical, empathetic advice. What are some key strategies for shifting that negative self-perception?
Yeah, this is really important. First, it's crucial to remember that the idea of being a loser is almost always a massive overgeneralization. It just doesn't accurately describe anyone's whole being.
One failure, or even a string of failures, doesn't define your entire life.
Exactly. Think of a famous athlete, right? They lose games, they lose races all the time, but we still view them as successful overall. One bad performance doesn't erase their entire career or identity.
That's a good perspective.
Yeah.
So what's a practical step someone can take?
Diversify your life. If your entire identity is wrapped up in one thing, your job, maybe, or one specific goal, then a setback there can feel absolutely catastrophic.
Because it feels like your whole self failed.
Precisely. But if you have multiple areas of your life that bring fulfillment, family, friends, hobbies, community involvement, learning from, you have more sources of self-worth to fall back on when one area faces a challenge. You're more stable.
Okay, diversify. What else?
Another key thing is to consciously identify your winning qualities, especially when you're feeling low.
Winning qualities. How do you do that when you feel like you've just lost?
Focus on your positive attributes, even small ones. Are you good at math? Are you friendly to strangers? Are you physically strong? Are you kind to your pets? Remind yourself of all the valuable qualities that make you a worthwhile person, completely separate from whatever setback you just experienced.
It's like taking an inventory of your strengths and positive traits.
Exactly. And critically, connect with your support system.
Lean on friends and family.
Absolutely. True friends, trusted family members, they can validate you. They often see your good qualities more clearly than you do when you're down. They can help you recognize and appreciate them.
And maybe being open about your struggles helps too.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Often, others will reciprocate with their own struggles, and that vulnerability can actually strengthen those bonds. You realize you're not alone.
That's huge. What else should people avoid?
Avoiding comparison is absolutely crucial. Comparing yourself to others?
The social media trap.
Totally. Everyone has a different path, different struggles, different starting points. Comparing your behind-the-scenes struggle to someone else's highlight reel, especially based on just one metric like career success or whatever, it just leads to inaccurate and negative conclusions. It's poison.
Good advice. Anything else?
And finally, regularly check in with your mood. A persistently low mood can seriously distort your self-perception. It makes you much more likely to blame yourself, exaggerate your faults, and overlook your positives.
So recognize that feeling down might be coloring everything gray.
Exactly. And if that low mood, that feeling of worthlessness, persists for more than, say, 2 weeks, the sources strongly recommend seeking professional help. Talking to a therapist can be vital.
Really important point. Okay, so we've taken quite a deep dive today, haven't we?
We really have.
We've explored how self-efficacy, the belief in your ability, a growth mindset, embracing challenges,
The power of not yet.
grit, that long-term passion and perseverance,
Sticking with it.
and discipline, the engine of consistent effort. They aren't just abstract psychological concepts, are they?
No, they feel like really practical tools.
Powerful, interconnected tools that empower us to navigate life's inevitable challenges. They equip us to face failure not as some definitive ending, but as, well, crucial data.
An opportunity to learn, adapt, and ultimately maybe even thrive because of it.
And we've discovered that true, durable happiness and success, they might not be just about achieving specific outcomes, those external wins.
Right, and not just the trophies.
But more about cultivating the inner qualities, the courage to just engage in the process, to put in the effort, and to commit to continuous growth, win or lose.
Focusing on the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. So as you, our listener, move forward from this conversation, maybe consider this. What's one area in your own life where you might consciously choose to shift, maybe from a more fixed approach to a growth approach? Where could you embrace that powerful idea of not yet?
It's a challenging question.
It is. And maybe consider this too. What if the biggest risk we face isn't actually failing, but maybe never truly daring to begin, never truly living out our full potential because we're too afraid of that failure?